This week, it's time for Security Money. The index is up, but the previous quarterly results were brutal. In the Leadership and Communication segment, get out of the audit committee, why CISOs need dedicated board time, quietly burning out, what to do when your leadership starts lacking, how to rethink leadership to energize disengaged employees, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 399, recorded June 9th, 2025. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joining you from a lovely hotel room at Gartner Security and Risk at National Harbor. Yes, I'm at the conference this week. But joining me for this segment are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Hey, Jason, I see Rogers finally found a home.
He did find a home. We'll see if he makes a difference. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, one of my co-hosts one of our other co-hosts might have an opinion on that.
We'll see. But other than mandatory mini camps and Aaron Rodgers finding a new home, not a lot of news there. Nope. Not a lot of news.
Not a lot of news.
But I will say, the other type of football, Nations League Championship, Portugal won on Sunday, baby. Bring it.
There you go. There you go. Also joining me with no sports interest whatsoever, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, Ben, how's that house coming?
Good. It's doing well, man. Started, deep into the building now. So hopefully that will be done soon. This weekend, we were up at my daughter's high school graduation. So headed to college in the fall. So yeah, a lot going on here.
A lot going on. And last, but definitely not least, Summer Fowler, your first Security Money segment.
Yeah, I'm excited about this, and I wish that the Steelers were in the building phase instead of the picking up Aaron Rodgers phase, but that's okay. I mean, we'll see what we can do. My husband and I were talking about it last night, and he said, "Hey, maybe he's here just to show some new guys the ropes." But we'll see. I like the memes. The memes are good.
You drafted a couple capable quarterbacks for the future. As long as Mr. Rodgers takes the chip off of his shoulder, he might actually help.
And doesn't burn the clubhouse to the ground, right?
Hey, and more importantly, Game 3 for the Stanley Cup Finals tonight.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yeah. I'm hoping for another OT. I want 7 games of OT.
That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah. Oh great. No, it's already a long enough sport to watch. I don't need overtime. Did anybody say so? The Canadian Open was this weekend. It went to four playoff holes. They played the 18th hole 5 times in a row before somebody finally won.
Wow.
It was like Groundhog's Day. It was crazy, actually. But anyways, all right. So Security Money, little background, Summer, right? Because this is your first one.
Yeah.
When I came to the Security Weekly podcast, well, it was my 8-year anniversary last week. So I got a bunch of people congratulating for 8 years. I was doing part-time work for Paul, but I officially came over in late 2018. And when I came over, I wanted to create a new segment to track the money side of security, right? Because I've done a lot of startups, and I said, well, let's create a segment that the Security Money segment to track public and private companies, right? So I went out at the time and took the top 25 pure play publicly traded companies, and I created an index, and I baselined the index at 1,000. So It's just a weighted average. The benchmark started at 1,000, and I've been tracking this data since late 2017. Okay, so I have all this historical data. But what's happened over the years is new IPOs, companies got bought. Like, so there's always a constant, like, kind of reshuffle of the index every so often. And then I track all the private investments, like who's getting funding, all that other stuff. So I rolled that into one show. We do it once a quarter. Here's the show. Okay. So we're going to go through public first, kind of the public markets, what's going on. Then we're going to go through kind of the private funding, some interesting stuff on that front as well. And that's the segment. So the index closed on Friday, June 6th at 2713.69. So remember I said it started at 1,000. So that's 171% increase since its inception, right? So not bad. I mean, it's been, I guess I'd have data. So it's been 8 years, 171%. That's a pretty good return. It's definitely up from last quarter. Last quarter, the index was down a little bit. And I benchmarked that against the NASDAQ because that's our closest kind of overall index, which closed at 19,529.95. That's an increase of 194%. So that's also up, by the way. So in general, the NASDAQ tends to perform better than the index. Remember, index is a pure play vendor. So what's not in here is Microsoft or Cisco or some of those other vendors that I don't consider pure play security vendors. And trust me, it's just 25 vendors because Tomo Bravo bought the rest of them.
It's getting harder and harder to get pure plays.
Yes, it is. Thank God for SailPoint last quarter going back into the IPO market so I could add them to the index. Not only do I track the index, right, in those 25 and look at the benchmark, the index and how it moved, I also review all the quarterly reports. So I go through the 25 quarterly reports for each of the companies in the index, and I kind of extract out two really interesting things. One is I compare revenue estimates to revenue actual, and the same for profit. So I want to see how are the companies performing against analyst expectations. I also look at the analyst ratings, see how those trend and track over time, because they're always interesting. Like is security out of favor, in favor, and anyway. So this next section really goes through that analysis. Now, here's what was really interesting this last quarter. So this is mostly Q4 results from 24. The revenue beat on average was 0.71%.
Eked through.
And as these guys know, have been on the show a while, we're usually seeing 2-3% average beats on revenue, right? This is the lowest number I've ever reported, which means the market's kind of squeaked by on the revenue side. We're definitely seeing compression. But the one that shocked me was the profit miss. It's usually a profit beat. The industry missed by 16.56% on average. This is the first time
it's the worst we've ever seen, right?
I don't think I've and I don't think I've ever seen negative, Jason.
Yeah.
Right? That maybe a small beat,
yeah. Yep.
but we missed big time in some of these. And you see it in the results, which means the market is definitely under more pressure. At least it was through Q4, and I don't know how much it relaxed in Q1 because those earnings estimates are just coming out now. But the market's definitely taking kind of a downturn a little bit, at least from a revenue profit perspective.
Oh, we're gonna see some of the, let's call it the fruit of that, or the outcomes of that later on when we start talking about layoffs and things of that nature. I mean,
layoffs,
the operational costs were through the roof last year, right? And now into Q1 to Q2, starting to see some of these larger companies slim out, lean out, operational efficiency.
Yeah, it's not even the larger companies; it's some of the smaller ones too, right? Some of the startups, like they've been affected by recently as well. So
Yeah.
So then I look at all those numbers and I say, well, who performed well? Like if I were to make investments, individual investments, who would I look at? So best performing last quarter was CyberArk, Leidos, and Fastly. Fastly was worse the quarter before. So they went from worst to best, which is always interesting quarter to quarter when you look at it. They get beat up, so expectations go down, and then they beat, and then they look like they're heroes. So Fastly went through that, that shift last quarter. Worst performing, SailPoint, which just came out from private back into the IPO market. They missed on profitability right out of the gate. They had a huge miss, by the way. It was like $4.90 miss on the profit side. Like, it was huge. They must have written something off, but it was a major miss. And I was like, ooh. But I'm like, yeah, they just came back into the public market, so maybe they had planned that kind of miss. But man, it was a huge miss. Varonis and Verint. F5 was also on this list, and they missed revenue by over 18%. It was like a $200 million miss.
Yeah, big miss.
It was huge.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they helped drag down the averages.
Yeah.
Of course. Let's see. The average analyst rating is 1.652, which is a moderate buy. That's down from last quarter. We were kind of a strong buy. So you see also the analyst ratings coming down a little bit through this cycle.
Yeah, it's showing more caution to the sentiment, right? I mean, just be cautious.
Yeah, very cautious. Best rated CyberArk, Rubrik, and Sentinel-1. Both CyberArk and Rubrik were on last quarters as well. Yeah. And worst rated Fastly again, which is
crazy when you look at the up top, right? Might be one of the best performers.
That's what I said.
Right.
They're rated really, really bad, so expectations go down and then they beat. That's how it works, guys. F5, obviously, after a huge revenue miss, is not rated very well, and NetScout's on that list as well. So
be interesting to see how Sentinel-1 trends after their outage, right? After the impact that they had recently.
Yeah,
exactly. It's interesting. Now we're going to talk CrowdStrike a little bit. CrowdStrike just announced right before this, and CrowdStrike's guidance really hit the stock last week. It took a huge hit because the future guidance and some of their outage expense and costs started to come into the equation. So Ben, to your point, it'll be interesting to see how Sentinel-1 trends, having gone through an outage recently, that might impact downstream earnings or profitability. But it took almost a year for CrowdStrike to show up.
Yep.
Yeah, thought that was interesting. No IPOs last quarter, not yet. There's a few out there, trying to test the markets, but not in cyber yet. Sophos completed the SecureWorks acquisition, which was the last change we made. SecureWorks acquisition, SailPoint coming in. That's when I had to do the last index update on this side. Some big layoffs, a few here, right? Microsoft laid off a big. They had a couple.
They went through two.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is that we sent some folks to the Build conference recently, which is the big developer conference that they have. And the layoffs happened the week before. And it was noticeably a different atmosphere there at the Microsoft conference from the people who came back and kind of chatted with us. But it was all the buzz.
Yeah, nothing to change morale like a nice layoff. Yeah.
No, I mean, the mantra is, and they actually did videos of it. Listen, I'm a level 3, level 4 developer. Guess what? I'm going to go into the new Visual Studio now, and I'm going to give it a prompt and say, code me XYZ, and it does the work of your level 1, your level 2, and now you're doing QA and bug fixes.
Yeah,
and they were demoing
that trend, that's the same thing on CrowdStrike, right? CrowdStrike's announcement was around AI, right? That a lot of that was going to theoretically be AI. There's a couple companies that have come out and said, like, any hiring that they do, they want to evaluate against the potential for AI to do that work. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be concerned if I was a developer right now. I had a conversation over the weekend about this with somebody that said, we're still going to need humans in the loop. And I said, nope. I mean, I think the next gen of AI is going to change that drastically, and companies are starting to react on both, earnings and hiring around that.
You will need humans. You just won't need all of those humans.
Correct.
Yeah.
That we've needed in the past.
And no, this is the other pressure point people have to understand. it's not necessarily US based humans.
Yeah.
It
Right.
could be offshore humans
Sure.
that are a fraction of the cost. Okay.
Yes.
And these cost pressures are going to force companies to continue to look at offshoring some of these resources as they make some of these shifts, because now they can get QA and testing cycles out of India and some of these other offshore locations less expensive than hiring a US based resource. I
100%.
see it every day.
Matt,
100%.
even with the less expensive of the offshore, I would look for potentially large changes in both India, China, like Brazil, like where those net assets have been very human capital centric. As that shift starts to happen,
Yeah.
I think we're also going to see it there, and the economics and the impact are. It's not just going to be U.S. based; it's going to be a global change.
Yeah. Yes. The other layoff here that I pointed out was NIST, National Institute
Yeah.
of Standards
Yeah.
Technology, laid off 497. And that's some of the impacts of some of the, I think, Doge work and some
Doge
of the
cuts, yeah.
funding
Oh, yeah.
cuts. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
listen, I have a really, really good relationship with our local CISO rep here. And at the end of it, they were doing a lot of those freebie penetration tests and assessments for, call it your anchor institutions, public sector, right? So school districts, municipalities, government-owned utilities, things of that nature. And now they're coming back saying, after all this, we probably won't be able to get to you until a year and a half from now to do an assessment. Can you imagine that? Where they had all of these lined up. Now they're saying, time out, we can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
We'll just have AI do
Big
them.
impact.
We'll just have AI do it.
There you go.
Well, and that's not to mention the voluntary, like people who voluntarily left, not even part.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's
Right. Which there was
And there may
some
be a pendulum
mass.
back. I mean, we've seen some rehires going on as a result of changes to that, but yeah, I mean, the long-term impact of that, it's not. I don't think it's going to be good.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. To Summer, to your point, we definitely saw some of that CISO leadership, some of those folks leaving, right? Like voluntarily leaving,
Yeah.
which also puts more strain and pressure on that as well. All right. That's the public side of this. Now let's go with the private side. So where do I get all my data? Summer, just so you know, Adrian covers this on his show, Enterprise Security Weekly, and he's one of the best real-time sources for this data that I've been able to use on a regular basis, because there are other people that have this data, but it varies, right? And timing of the data varies and when it comes out and all this other stuff. So it's always interesting. So I always just go to Enterprise Security Weekly, I pull the data from there, and then I summarize it here in this segment. So some really interesting funding announcements. Now, remember, this is last quarter, so it's right before RSA conference. And if you look at the early part of the quarter, not a lot of announcements. But as you get closer to RSA conference, you start to see these things pick up. So you get, these large ones like Ninja One for $500 million, right?
These are some big rounds, man. Big rounds.
Yeah.
Island, 250 million. Times, which is a workflow, 125. These are big rounds, and you could see the effects of that with some of the money that was being spent by some of these vendors at RSAC conference this year.
Yep. I mean, it's showing there's still an appetite, right? There's still an appetite out there. I mean, I don't know. How is that outside of cybersecurity? Have you been paying attention to that, Matt? Is there equivalent levels of appetite for funding, or is this because we're focusing on the cyber side and there's still a huge need?
Yeah, so we were talking about this a little bit this morning at breakfast before we went over to Gartner. And I think one of the reasons we see these funding rounds is we saw a big uptick in startups around 2019, right? Cyber became important. So we started to see this cash infusion in 2019 of these companies coming in. COVID hits, which puts us in this 2-year period of almost stagnation in some respects. And so what some of these VCs and firms had to do was to kind of prop them up. Well, now that we're past that, they now need to make some of these cash infusions to keep these investments going. The turnaround time for these exits have now been elongated. So now what you're seeing, I think part of this, Jason, is what you're seeing is in order to get to the exit, the cash infusions get bigger and bigger and bigger to keep these companies afloat, to give them the capital they need to continue to grow. Island's a good example of that. They've taken some other large rounds, but they're also getting long in the cycle of exit expectations.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the story behind why all the drama with Cybereason just happened?
Yes.
The CEO was fighting with the investors about funding, saying we're about to go bankrupt, we need funding. There was that whole back and forth between the merger or making an acquisition with TrustWave. I know a couple of board members resigned, so it's been a lot of drama around that. But I think a lot of it was that whole funding mechanism to keep them afloat.
Exactly right. And remember, Cybereason took a huge down round, like a 90% down round to stay afloat. And that's why they were looking for this capital infusion, and why the CEO quit, and the deal with TrustWave was, I think, terminated. But then they went out and they raised $120 million to keep it afloat because nobody wants to lose their core investment.
Right. Yeah. And now there's a big lawsuit too. And I took a look at the lawsuit, and the ex-Treasury Secretary is named in it, Munchin. He's part of that Liberty Strategic Capital Group.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's got some big names in this lawsuit.
Yeah.
I think the other industries, as you were asking about that, and the appetite for raising, it's AI, right? All over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, it's OpenAI, Safe Superintelligence. They were in the billions in their raises. And then we saw some big raises in fintech and biotech as well, right? Was it fintech? It was Plaid. Plaid had a really big private round. It was like $500 million. So I think that we're seeing that. But if you put it to scale, that's still pretty good for these cyber companies that are making this. Yeah. I mean, Island's not far behind.
I was talking to someone on the VC side last week, and they were saying that, there's still a lot of money that's out there waiting, right, for things that they can invest in, right? They're kind of sitting on the sidelines and still waiting. And so I think we're going to see more. I think it's certainly going to affect cyber. But to your point, Summer, there's big money in AI. I mean, I think people are looking to that. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of cyber companies trying to pivot and use AI in something they're doing. They're trying to capture the hype cycle.
Yeah.
Yep. Because a lot of VCs are holding dry powder because they don't know how long it's going to take to get some of these companies exited to put that money back to work, right? Yeah. So, I agree with you, but I know there's cash being reserved to keep some of these propped up. Yeah. Let's see a couple other ones. SumGrep, lots of buzz about them and some of their licensing changes. They raised $100 million. Paul's company Eclipsium raised $45 million. So, there's some good rounds in here. But what I noticed, Jason, is the number of deals really shrunk.
Yeah. Yeah. We usually have a longer list.
We do. Yes.
No doubt.
Yep. And I have the history of all these folks. So trust me, I know this list is short.
Yeah.
Also acquisitions. So a couple really interesting ones. Obviously, we know the Wiz acquisition by Google for $32 billion was a pretty big one. There's a lot of news on that one because Wiz said no to $23 billion and then got $32 billion. So that worked out in their favor. Yeah. There's a couple other ones that were interesting to me anyways. We had SafeBase by Drata. SafeBase is like a third-party questionnaire company. It's so funny. The third-party risk management use case is hot again. And it was hot there for a while, kind of dwindled, but I've seen the momentum pick back up. There's rumors on the street that Black Kite's about ready to get bought and a couple others. So I'm seeing some really interesting movement on the third-party side again because we still haven't solved third-party risk management.
Right. And I think more and more frameworks, regulations are focusing on it again. I know like CMMC has a big third-party risk component to it now. So you want to be able to do business with the DoD and become one of their third-party contractors. Guess what? You got to get your CMMC badge. And part of that is making sure you have a solid third-party vendor risk program. So that may be helping.
Matt, I'm wondering in here, so you have SolarWinds listed, right? And even earlier on the funding side, you were talking about Island. And I know Island's really trying to position a little bit more as an infrastructure side than a pure security play. And SolarWinds, I certainly think about that. Like, how do you think about these companies like that are on the security side, but really are more attached or trying to reach more of that infrastructure money?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, obviously, Island is it's an enterprise browser play, right?
Yeah.
Which you could say it's infrastructure, but it was built to be a secure enterprise browsing platform. So it started from a security side. They're trying to expand to get into some of that money. Again, at breakfast this morning, you know, security is a fraction of the IT budget, less than
Yeah,
10%,
100%. Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So where do I go open up additional budget paths? It's on the IT side. So can I take something like an Island that is a browser, which is the gateway into all these enterprise applications, and open up some IT budgets to become part of that? Yes, I got a security slant, but now I can tap into IT budgets, right? Same with SolarWinds. The reason I put SolarWinds in here is there's a lot of uncertainty what's going to happen with SolarWinds now that Turner River Capital came in and bought them. And, are they still reeling from the breach? And is this, just more to come or whatever? So they're just interesting plays, Ben. And there's a bunch on this side. You've got Kaseya and others in a similar boat that are a broader IT platform that have security capabilities in them. So they're trying to tap into the bigger IT budgets.
You brought up an interesting side point there that I hadn't really considered, but I'm interested, Summer and Jason, how you feel about this, where you come out. Like SolarWinds, like how much of the breach is still lingering there, right? Like what's still attached to them as far as, I don't know, bad PR, because they got handled so well from a PR side, but yet at the same time, I think there is a lot of, I don't know what it is. It's velcroed onto them, just stuck, right? That kind of continues. Like, how long does does a breach of that magnitude last? Right?
I'll say it's still stuck, because anytime I mention SolarWinds, even folks who aren't in IT say, "Oh, the company that got breached." First thing out of their mouth, still.
I mean, let's look at it this way. How do I think it will impact their bottom line? I don't know, but I think that like Jason said, it's stuck on them. Just like we still, when we talk about the OG breach, we talk about Target. Okay.
Yeah.
We still say Target when we talk about third party. And that was what, 2013, 20, it was so long ago, over a decade ago. And
The Target thing. So let's look at the two, Target and SolarWinds, not to dive down too much in this hole, but, Target, I think, yes, we talk about it in security, but I don't think people look at it and go, I'm not going to buy Target, or I'm not going to shop at Target because of the breach, right? Where I do think, like, if you're having a conversation at the director level, executive staff level, and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, I do think that conversation comes up, right? Which aligns back to the larger discussion we always have about, like, security being really a business level topic. And that's a good indicator. If you do it wrong, and no matter how you feel about the incident itself, if you come out with that stuck to you, it will impact your long-term business revenue, and you should take security seriously as a whole, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, though, Target is consumer retail, where the average consumer isn't going into it thinking, "Oh, that's the company that got breached."
Yeah, it's not product side, right? That's why I call out SolarWinds.
They're saying, right? Where people who are making decisions about SolarWinds are in the business,
right?
Yeah,
they know the risk.
But if you're in any IT security, like vendor to vendor company, right? Yeah. It's the case that you want to point to and say, no, I need a seat at the table around this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah.
You would think. One more before we switch over to articles. We had a death in Q1 of 2025, and that was Skybox Security. And it's interesting because I remember when I went to RSA back in 2012, we looked at acquiring Skybox Security, Red Seal, and it was Core Security at the time, right? It's weird to me. Like they're gone. They just vanished, right? They laid off all their employees. They sold their assets to Tufin. They're no longer. Like they were one of 4 firewall vendor management companies back in the day, and poof, now they're gone.
Yep.
Yeah, sell out and be acquired or before you go away and your market dissolves,
Before
right? Like
impending
that's
doom.
learn from
and
that.
Totally.
this is the
Yeah.
thing. This is the thing that I think is really interesting, right? Is so this company was around for 15 or so years with no exit or no way to get that exit. If you're a startup now, you got to think about not only your fundraisers, but you got to think about your exits because you don't want to be here 15 years later and then just vanish off the planet.
Right.
Yeah. I talked to a guy who, on the startup side, right, CEO of a company, and he said he had gone through several rounds. I think it was like either D or E series. And he was like, look, I had an offer to get out, I think like B series round, right? And he was like, I should have taken it because, yes, it was a lot less money. But if I evaluate at the end of the day, like the aggravation, the time, the effort, like everything, I could have gone and started another company and exited again in that time period. Like it would have been much smarter. And so I think you really have to play with what the whole set of variables with that, not just what is the cost, what is the payout. Like it's the long term of what the opportunity cost is. And I think investors need to think about that too.
Yeah, agreed. So much so that, yeah, it has to be part of your strategy, I think, as a startup these days. You got to know where your exit paths are because when the market gets tight like it is and you can't raise the funds or you can't show the growth and it becomes a down round, trust me, it's a slog and it's not something you want to do very long.
Yeah. Or on the flip side of that, you have to be ready to capitalize on a good time in the market.
Right.
So you want to be ready if it is a public exit, if it's an IPO, and if that market gets hot, you want to be ready to capitalize on that and not have to miss that window.
Yep. Which means you got to be ready to turn profitability on at any given time, almost on a dime. As a large company, think about the islands of the world and these large companies that have raised lots of money that are priming to go to the IPO market. They have to be ready to go and be able to flip that switch to go from growth into profitability mode because now you're going to be recognized and looked at differently in the market.
Matt, that viewpoint hasn't changed all the way back to when we interviewed Robert Herjavec.
Yep.
Remember, that's exactly what he was saying during that interview.
Yeah.
This is where we're at from an investment perspective. You have to be in these positions.
Yeah. And we're still in that cycle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we know SailPoint wants to do it. I think also Netscope is a strong contender, right, for IPO this year.
Yeah. You've got a bunch of them that are
Sneak.
big. Yep, Sneak's sitting there. You've got the Trellix, which is the recombination of McAfee and Symantec that were both public companies that came out that got. There's a number of them that could be looking at eyeing an IPO market to go back out, but you've got to have all the fundamentals and in the discipline in place to be ready to go.
Yeah,
we'll see. All right. That's the end of Security Money. Let's get into this week's articles. The first one, this was also in my morning breakfast today. It's so funny. Like, I didn't plan this at all. It says, get out of the audit committee. Why CISOs need dedicated board time. So I was talking to one where their CISOs talking at the audit committee. Now, look, great presentation, great accolades from the audit committee, but that's not necessarily the dedicated board time that some of these CISOs really need.
No. Right. And I mean, at the end of it, even the CISOs who are lucky enough to get a seat with the board, maybe get 15 minutes, a half an hour.
Yep.
And they're pushed to be like, all right, in and out, let's go. Give me your operational numbers. Give me your compliance update. Boom, 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 out the door. That's not enough either. Right.
No.
Maybe they get quarterly if they're lucky. If not, they're meeting with them once a year. That's not even close to enough.
Any article that has George in it is I'm a big fan of George Gerchow, so loved having this on there. But I'm with you. Like, you need that time, and frankly, it is about more than just the numbers, and it's about walking away with a shared understanding of the risk, which really is for every function. It's not like it's unique to us. But I think that that's well understood through the numbers in some other functions.
Yes.
And then for whatever reason, as soon as the cybersecurity numbers start, everybody like loses their perspective of, I'm talking about risk.
Yeah, because,
Well, I was gonna say, to be honest with you, I love the cadence that he presented at one of his previous organizations, where he got that time with the board, he got that alone time with the board, but also was able to have one-on-one time with no other executives, not even the CEO, in the room, and be able to have that really frank, candid time with board members. I think that's awesome. That's a great cadence right there.
And the biggest return on that, they didn't call this out, right? But if you've got that relationship with the board and you've got that time with the board, that sells your relevance to the rest of the executive staff.
Absolutely.
Right? If they don't take you seriously, then you're another, right? But as soon as they start taking you seriously, you're having those conversations, you're seen as part of the business, it gives you that relevance, it gives you that respect, and that drives a lot, because we talk about tone at the top. That's true tone at the top.
And it gives you juice to influence and make change, right?
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, the peers that you have in the organization don't want you going back to that little one-on-one meeting with the board saying, I have a roadblock. And this is where the roadblock is.
Yeah.
That's right.
The political ace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the juice.
Yep.
It's the juice.
It is. Before I get into the next article, I gotta pull this up quickly. So there's been this interesting little banter on LinkedIn today about one of the CISO online articles about rare earth skill sets or something for the CISO, to the point where Ira Winkler called it out saying, hey, I think this was written by AI, because a lot of the recommendations in here, and I replied to him today going, yeah, Ben caught one a few weeks ago, and I scrutinized these articles a heck of a lot more so that we don't fall into that trap.
You've been calling them out.
Yeah.
Calling them out.
Yeah. So, yeah. Because this next one kind of goes down that path a little bit, right? CISO roles expand beyond cybersecurity as organizations embrace strategic security leadership. At least we hope we do. But the question is how much of this is actually happening on a broad scale? And it probably varies by market segment, because in certain market segments, I don't see this yet.
Yeah. I mean, one of the comments right out of the gate kind of tells the story unto itself. It says approximately 39% of CISOs now holding executive level titles, including EVP, SVP.
Yeah.
Right? That tells me where we're at.
Yep.
That tells me we're not seated at the table. That means we're reporting to a C level. Right out of the gate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's up 4% from 2 years ago.
There's another stat here that I called, that I thought, where it said that, 4%. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, 4% gain. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I looked at the stat about saying that the monthly or quarterly meeting was 65% among enterprises with revenues exceeding 10 billion. Yeah. There's a big difference between monthly and quarterly. Like, the impact of that is huge, right? Of whether you're doing it monthly or quarterly, and mixing those stats is not helpful in an article like this. Like, it doesn't tell.
I will say, what's the definition of engage?
Yeah.
Because you think a $10 billion organization is going to be engaging at a high level monthly with the CISO? I don't know. Not based on all of the articles that we've been reading week over week over week. What's the definition of engage? Are you sending them a report that they browse and they peruse and then throw it aside? I don't know.
A lot of those companies still don't even have CISOs. So remember.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know.
Exactly it.
Yep.
And then when your CISO is considered the SVP or the EVP, are they really a CISO, or are they just a VP of information security?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I had to pull that whole CISO online article out before I read this one, because I'm like, we kind of get trapped in these narratives,
right?
That articles continue to cover. And it's like, wait a minute, those are also setting up all this analysis for these AI engines. We're basically regurgitating the same stuff. And I'm like, who's going to break the mold? Now, there's some other good data in here. Don't get me wrong. Like the compensation, financial upside potential of a tactical, functional, and strategic CISO. Look, there's value there, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't tell me that when you go from 35% to 39% of EVP and SVP titles as a win, when we think that this position is a C-level position, like it just starts off like wrong, and it sets all this other data in a weird tone where I love the analysis of the data. Like, yes, you should be strategic as a CISO. How do you get there? But I'm not sure that this is instantly happening across the board.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot like many of the articles we put on here. It's speaking to nirvana, not speaking to the reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it would also be interesting, and I would love to see this, where are the CISOs of yesterday today? And they talk a lot about the role going into risk, like a chief risk officer, which actually I've taken on enterprise risk at my company. So it is something, but where are we seeing CISOs go?
Yeah.
Where, it's like, do we cross the Rainbow Bridge too with all the dogs? Like, where do we go after the CISO role, right?
Right.
I mean, that would actually be my dream, is to be with a
We're
bunch
off
of
to
dogs all the
Valhalla.
time. Yeah,
I love it.
it would be amazing. But honestly and truly, like, thinking about the if we are going to be strategic, which is where we want to be, what is the strategy for post CISO role and what we need to do? And you don't hear a lot about that. You hear going consulting, going board, going vCISO. You don't hear a lot of CEO. You don't hear a lot of other role. And so that's something I want to watch closely and see what we shape moving forward.
I mean, if there ever ends up being an emerging trend, because what I'm seeing is that the diversity of the CISO allows them to put their mind where they want to go and attack it. I've seen CISOs go to CIO. I've personally done that. I've seen CISOs go to chief digital officer. I've seen them go to chief risk officer. Like I think because of the diversity of what we do across the organization, anybody who wants to set their mind to it, I think they can start attacking another C-level role and be successful in it. I really do.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Operations, executives, the CEO role, COO, a founder, right? I think that's also another very valid path. Yeah, for sure. Next article, preparing for AI, the CISO's role in security, ethics, and compliance. I'm thinking this should be there all the time, not just preparing for AI, but
If with everything, right?
Yes.
It's like any other new technology hitting the street that your board and your executives want to jump in on, right?
Yeah.
Don't be the department of no. It's the same mantra.
Yeah.
Don't be the department of no. Don't be the roadblock. Don't be the reason why other executives are going to the board and the leadership team saying, that's my roadblock over there.
Yeah.
Figure out how you can enable the business.
It talks about this from an AI perspective, and I'm reading the list, and I'm like, data use, understanding the terms before sharing vital information, third-party risk management. Anybody?
Yep.
Like,
anybody? Right. I mean, these are all things you have to be focused on with any technology coming into your organization.
Yeah. Data sovereignty. That was, I mean, how much did we talk about that with migration to the cloud?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly right. And then design your resilience. Ransomware? Anybody?
Yeah,
just
anywhere.
saying.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm just saying, like these characteristics, okay, I get it. It's in the context of AI, but this is the CISO's role in general, I think, or should be, right? In designing security, ethic, compliance programs that handle this, but it's not just for a subset of technology. It should be holistic.
It's like AI in marketing right now, Matt. It drives clicks. You're going to get people opening the article because it has AI in the name. Right. But you're absolutely right. This should translate across everything. But right now, AI is the thing.
So here's a question, and I don't want to get too deep into it. We could do a whole episode on this. But I was talking to another CISO today about AI and with the resilience realm of it. Do any of you believe that there is a big shift in how you do incident response when it comes to AI? Or do you think it's just following the same process when it is AI? And I'll tell you, I'm now like, my mind has been spinning all day on this one. I don't have a solid answer right now, but I really want to explore it. Is it just a part of like total cost of ownership?
I don't have a solid answer either. I would hope the fundamentals of what we would do in a normal incident response would stand true.
Yeah.
Are there going to be nuance in the way we have to react? Probably. But I would hope the fundamentals and the foundation are still the same.
Yeah. And I think maybe it might come down to, if you realize it is an AI caused or AI issue, and can you get to the controls to shut it down if it's third party?
Right.
And then how does that shift your internal operations? It's one I want to explore, and it's something that I thought of as part of this article was kind of a side thing that maybe there is a little bit of difference there.
Yeah, what's your failover mechanism? Can I rip the AI out and still function as a business? Now, from a resiliency standpoint, I think that's a really interesting question companies should be asking is, if my AI goes rogue, can I shut it down and still function as a business?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do I still have a, my emergency brake?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? If my brakes fail.
But I mean, to your point earlier,
I
Summer,
think
that's what
one of the things we have to be really careful about.
Right? I mean, could we
We
function
gotta be
without,
really careful
if we
about
migrated everything
losing-
to AWS or Azure? Could we function?
Right.
Same questions.
Yep. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we have to be really careful about this transition into AI, about losing the capability to do something we used to be able to do, lost knowledge, right? There are a lot of instances where we've lost the capability as a human race, as a species, to do something because we no longer do that menial task, right? Things have evolved. We use, CAD CAM, we use design software to do stuff. And so like designing really complex parts is hard. And I think that's one of the areas of all of a sudden, if we switch IR to this automation process in AI, and we don't know the basics of how we did that process in the first place, that puts us in a really, really bad place, especially from a resilience perspective, but also from just figuring out how to improve it, right? I mean, there will improvements that will come from the AI side, but I think human ingenuity brings a lot of improvements to process that we don't necessarily think about on the front side.
Right.
Yeah.
Next article, what 18 years in Toastmasters taught me about leadership that no MBA could. I love this article, by the way.
Me too.
I love this article because Toastmasters is meant for people to get comfortable with public speaking. Yeah. But what this article talks about is when you listen and understand other people's perspectives, how that actually helps you almost 100%. Better than the public speaking aspects of it.
Has anybody here done Toastmasters?
I have not.
I have. So one of my previous companies, the CEO was big on getting folks all the way through the ranks, really good at public speaking because they're a consulting company. So at every level, you should be comfortable speaking in public. He actually hired Toastmasters to come in and do a weekly session for probably 6 to 8 months straight, where you could stay after work, get with a Toastmasters professional, and really learn the craft of public speaking. It was absolutely amazing when you'd throw out topics that you would speak on and just, you'd prepare and you'd bring your own perspective to the table. But now if you have a group of like 20 others in their perspective, hearing their difference in perspective, it's just amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I think, Jason, that the key to this one was, and I would highly encourage other people to do this, don't necessarily bring Toastmasters into your org unless you're bringing it in with the people from the public that are coming in. The value you get is getting outside of your org. The value you get is being with people who aren't in cybersecurity or in your industry or whatever. And now you're really learning. And that's why it's like, hey, this is better than an MBA because, by the way, I'm working with someone who might be a teacher's aide or somebody who is, trying to become fire chief and they need to give a speech for it. And so that perspective and thinking outside of our world, that's the invaluable. This was such a feel-good article. I loved it.
Yeah. And it made me rethink my experience with it and appreciate what I got, but also realize what a difference it would have made if it was a global experience.
Right.
If I had somebody from another country, right? Yeah. Not just another vertical or somewhere, another country would be amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Now you're getting cultural differences and that type of diversity. That's
why, I did a ton of international travel for a few companies during my career. I value those overseas experiences because they taught you how to understand and fit in with other cultures. Even when I was crafting my keynote sessions for Singapore and Abu Dhabi, like bringing in the cultural aspects so that people would understand maybe complex things like cybersecurity, but in a way that they would understand it, right? Like if you do it right, you can learn from it and use it to actually make you a better communicator.
100%. I would say to anybody listening, if you get the opportunity to work with folks from other countries, get that exposure, right? I mean, I lived in another country for 10 years of my life, right? Over time I was, I'd go there every summer and live in Europe, live in Portugal. And then, one of my first careers outside of the military, which I obviously traveled all over the world as well. But, I was one of the only Portuguese speaking engineers in the company. And I had Portugal, Brazil, Mozambique. I had all these other countries that I needed to interface with. And just that alone just helps you kind of just, know your audience, know how to communicate differently, appreciate cultural differences. It's just such a good experience. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does Toastmasters have a virtual version?
I don't know. When I took it, it was all in person because
Yeah.
it wasn't really a huge thing back then. But
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
They must. I would say they must. I don't know.
I'm going to look that up.
Yeah,
because that would be
absolutely.
interesting as well, because it is a different skill,
Yep.
right? The being in person, the being virtual, and how you present. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah. Yeah. With COVID, they probably had to do something
I would
virtual.
think so.
You would think so.
Yeah.
Quietly burning out. What to do when your leadership starts lacking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I this is one of the ones that I love because me with staff and mental health and making sure we're taking care of our staff and keeping an eye on burnout. I consider it an epidemic, right? And with leaders, it's almost less obvious because folks who excel and become really high functioning and really impacting leaders, they hide it so well. They hide burnout well because it's just in their DNA. It's in their DNA to hustle and always be on, right? I think as folks who manage other leaders, our emotional intelligence needs to be through the roof with those folks.
Yeah.
And just don't keep an eye on them, right? Because it's so easy for them to burn out, not show it, and then hit the wall. You got to catch it before they hit the wall.
Well, it's funny. I was meeting with my CEO last week and he's like, look, I know you've been like just going, right?
Yep.
And he's like, I'm glad your daughter's getting married in Italy because you need the downtime. Like he knew it because we just been going so fast. Now, to me, I don't recognize it myself, right? I'm a workaholic. And so I just go, not thinking about the potential burnout side, right? But he knew enough to say like, hey, you know what? I'm glad you're going for 2 weeks because you need the downtime. And that's what you need from your leader sometimes is to go to the other, your other folks and go, look, like take the downtime, recharge those batteries. Cause I wasn't thinking about it that way. I'm just thinking like, all right, I got to get all this stuff done before I leave.
And you have to be intentional. As a leader, you have to be intentional about it, right? So we always talk about the power of good habits. Well, as a leader, make it a habit before you're one-on-one with the folks who report to you. Think about when was the last time that person took a day off? When did they disconnect last? Make that intentional, an intentional thought. Holy crap, it's been 3 months since they've taken 1 day off. Guess what? Take Friday off. You deserve it. Well done. Something like that, right? It's those little intentional things that help. You just have to make it a habit to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. Retention, restructuring, and the race for tech leadership talent. Now, this one pulls in some of the layoff stuff. Why is it happening? We talked a little bit about this in the first part of this with the security money segment, right? The kind of the overhiring, which you see. We did it post-pandemic. We also see companies doing this when they raise funds. And obviously the rise of AI and automation. So we brought all those up in parts of those conversations, but this article kind of wraps them around together and talks about why do we still see layoffs, right? The economic pressure, definitely there, definitely high, definitely a concern. But here's the biggest thing I want people to take away. Employees don't want to be retained.
Right.
We had this conversation when Jim Routh came on. Employees don't want to be retained. They want to be developed. They want a purpose in life, right? And the first thing this thing goes to is retention. And I'm like, like that's not what people want.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, folks want a mission. They want a purpose. They want to be doing something great for the organization. They want to know what they're doing is great for their clients, right? I mean, that's what's going to keep folks around and keep them sticky within the organization and just really be evangelists for the organization. Is it's not about just having a job and a salary anymore.
that thing that they want is different for each employee, right?
Yeah.
Part of your job as a leader or manager is to evaluate that, find that out, identify it, and then culture that, right? That's what retention is, right? It's understanding what the needs of your people are and then meeting those needs so they want to hang around. They don't want to be an employee.
Yeah.
That's not their goal.
I'll say that there are some staples though, right? There's some staple things that go across every single employee, at least that I work with, right? Trust, company culture. Those are two non-negotiables. They need to be able to trust the company they work for, and it needs to have a good culture. I think that goes across everyone.
Yeah. And that gets pulled into the last article, how to rethink leadership to energize disengaged employees. Because look, if the culture's not there, the trust's not there, they're going to be disengaged. Well, then your concept of developing these resources to retain them so they don't turn over, like these are all connected components that organizations need to focus on, especially in a world where, return to office mandates are not going to go over extremely well, but how do you work and keep employees engaged in virtual remote environments? These are all things that are at play every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was an eye opener to see the stat in here. 65% of employees feel stuck in their current job.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to feel stuck. Who wants to feel stuck? Nobody.
Yeah.
No thanks. No thanks. All right. That wraps up all the article segments.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. I'm going to be out the next 2 weeks. Our executive producer, my daughter, she's getting married in Italy. I got to go. Dad's got to be there. But don't worry, Adrian Sanabria will be here to keep the conversation going. They'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.